Okay. Hello, I'm Charlie Pumfrey. Welcome to the 10th episode of Halftime Cuppa's Halftime Podcast. Usually a 15-minute show where we discuss just one footballing topic in as much detail as possible. Today's show is a 2018 January transfer deadline day special. And joining me today on today's panel, we've got Eleanor Cardenas.
Hiya.
I've butchered that last name. I apologise.
No, you said it fine. It's totally fine. Hello.
Hello. How are we doing today?
Good. How are you?
Yeah, all good. And joining Eleanor today, we have Agboaye. I've probably butchered that last name as well. He'll be joining us in a minute or two. Busy with the gas man. Might as well be honest. And today we've got 3 topics today instead of the one transfer deadline day special, slightly longer than usual. And as I said, our 2 panelists will be discussing whether it's a good idea or a bad idea, or yes or no. Nice and simple, one side or the other. So okay. Should we start with this first topic, Gail?
Yeah. Let's go for it.
Perspective on it. First on, I'll best introduce the question. So is the MLS a viable place for young Premier League players to develop? And sort of this is in response to Jack Harrison, a young player who has just been signed by Man City from New York City and loaned out to Middlesbrough, and sort of whether that's a pathway for young players nowadays. So, Elle, what's your sort of perspective on that? Do you reckon the MLS is somewhere that would be good for young players, or is it not quite standard?
Well, I think I think it's good. It benefits the MLS, and I think it benefits obviously Europe, because the MLS, it has been known for a while as kind of like a retirement home for aging footballers. And I think the fact that they're getting in younger players and stuff. I think they had did they have from Argentina come in Ezekiel Barco, who signed for Atlanta United, and I think a lot of young kids are seeing that they have an opportunity to go to America, play football, and then kind of go into the Premier League or La Liga, or play for a bigger club. And I think it benefits Europe as well, because then they can send players out and get them improving, and maybe get a better deal as well.
Okay, so a sort of a proving ground for young players then.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, I'm not sure if Essay's back with us again.
Yes, I am now.
Okay, so Essay, what's your opinion on whether the MLS is a viable proving ground, as we've just been saying, actually, for young players, whether it be from the Premier League or La Liga or Serie A?
Could I just say, I like the way you pronounce Serie A.
Serie A, I apologise.
No, it was funny.
So yeah, would you say it's somewhere that young players should be looking to go potentially, as maybe a slightly different, an alternative maybe to the conventional routes?
Now, I'm a big believer in youngsters testing themselves, and I believe that the MLS is a great place for young players to go into uncharted territory. Okay. Although European football is seen as the best haven, the MLS doesn't seem bad, because the MLS has as well as its expansion sides, it also has like I'm not sure what it's called, but it has like D2 sides. I'm not sure what it's called. Like, for instance, the likes of Seattle, the team that Clint Dempsey used to play for. Yeah, Seattle Sounders, that's the one. And Atlanta United, they have second teams that play in the NASL or USL, I think. And those kind of teams are helpful to blood youngsters.
Okay, so you speak there actually about, would you say that that's viable then for European teams if they're going to send their young players to, say, New York City or an LA Galaxy? Does it make sense for them to be sending them there if they're going to be playing in a second tier of a country that's already deemed its top division not quite as competitive as some of Europe's higher tiers?
I think in the short term, no, but looking at it in the long run, then it's a positive.
Okay. So why would you say that's positive if playing in maybe some of the second tier in the US or playing in the MLS for a slightly lower team?
Thing is, though, with the MLS, it's getting stronger as it goes on, and it's being seen as less as a retirement home, more as a league for upcoming players. Like, I was just watching it season gone, and this player called Miguel Almiron plays for Atlanta United, and he's been doing quite well.
Okay, so just coming back to you, El.
Mm-hmm.
You spoke there actually about the CSA spoken about Miguel Almiron, and you've spoken about Ezequiel Barco. Would you say actually the MLS is proving to be somewhere that South American players, rather than their conventional route maybe into Europe via a Portugal or a Holland or a Belgium,
Yeah,
would you say the MLS is sort of slightly more unconventional route for that?
Yeah, and I think another thing that you've got to look at is Brexit and how that is going to affect a lot of players in South America and other clubs that aren't, not in Europe. And so these players, it might be easier for a club to get them somewhere like America. So maybe politically or economically, it might be easier to send youngsters over from South America versus having to deal with all the paperwork, which they already do now, but maybe even more so in England.
Okay, so it's a slightly more, be slightly easier logistically.
Yeah, I think so. I think 100%. I think I'm not aware of kind of sporting visas in the States, but I would assume that it probably is easier to get a sporting visa in America for a youngster than maybe for a youngster in Europe. And I know FIFA have a lot of regulations and stuff. Like I mentioned in my transfer article, Atletico got in trouble with that, I think, a few seasons ago, and how they handled their youngsters. So based on that, I think it is probably fairly complicated to deal with them. Where I think in the States, I do think it's probably easier, and therefore if the talent is there and the league is getting a better reputation, it does seem like it's more streamlined, so it is going to appeal to people.
Okay. Essay, coming back to you then, if we're talking about the MLS and its sort of relationship with the European leagues, would you say that potentially a partnership like with what Manchester City have with New York City and sort of more of a franchise role with a European club and a club in the States, would you say that's something that European clubs should look to pursue, or is it something that has not enough upside for quite a large investment?
Yeah, I think the link between MLS clubs and European clubs is a great idea. And a reasoning for that is that when taking on youth players, rather than shipping them off to European sides, they could ship them off to the MLS. That players could contest themselves, because we always talk about English players not really testing themselves and opting to stay in England rather than test themselves in Spain, Italy, Germany, etc. So I think it'll be a good idea for youngsters to go test themselves in the US physically and mentally.
Okay, that makes sense. So we're speaking now, actually, we're talking about the MLS. Let's maybe bring it back towards the European leagues as well. Is that actually, if you're a league like Holland or Belgium, where traditionally they've been leagues where players would go out on loan, or even lower leagues in England, what can you say that those leagues can do, and clubs in those leagues can do to try and entice players to stay in Europe and maybe offer them something that the MLS can't offer?
Well, aren't they really renowned for their youth program? I mean, because those players that come out of it, they can play pretty much any position. So I think the style of play, I know for Holland, is a big attractor for a lot of people.
Okay. So would you say the style of football is something that potentially is slightly more enticing in Europe than it would be in the MLS?
Because I know more about the youth system in Europe, I would say yes. But, I'm sure the MLS probably has some their way of playing as well. But I don't know if they focus on singular positions, but that's the English way of doing it though. Or if they do have a more well-rounded player and they train them up in every position.
Okay, so the development side of it potentially is slightly more, let's say, built up in Europe, than it is in the States, which I guess is just a byproduct of the MLS being quite young in comparison.
Well, and England as well.
Yeah, that seems fair enough. Okay, Essay. So obviously, with being a fan of a big club like Arsenal, what sort of, if say you're in charge at Arsenal, what sort of route would you be looking for that player? Say that you had a young Jack Wilshere or a young Hector Bellerin that maybe wasn't going to make it into the first team. What sort of route would you be taking with that young player?
Well, my go-to would be to maybe loan them out to a European club because obviously that's the I've lost the word. Hold on. Anyway, I look at shipping them off to Europe because that would be the plan A.
Okay.
So, although there's nothing wrong with loaning young players out to an MLS club, a European club would just make more sense.
Okay, so in what sense would you say it makes more sense? Because obviously we've spoken there about the fact that the MLS is quite competitive.
Like, it makes sense in the way that a player would stay in Europe and you wouldn't have to travel. You wouldn't have to travel as far to see how they get on.
Okay, so it's a slightly talking about travel actually with the sheer size of of America itself and the breadth of where one club plays and then where another club plays could be quite intensive on a young player. Would you say that would be a reason if they were playing in Holland or, as I mentioned, Holland and Belgium as the main places? There's not an awful lot of travel and it's just slightly closer to home for the player as well, I guess.
Yeah.
Okay. Any final thoughts on this? To be honest, because there's lots of reasons really for the MLS being a good proving ground for players that we've brought up here. It's really fantastic points. But what sort of is there anywhere else that you'd say that would be a good idea for young players? Maybe more developed leagues, established leagues in Europe, and sending them to slightly lower teams in those leagues. So Man City have sent a few players to Girona in Spain this year. Team that's first time in the first division. Would you say that's something the club should look to explore, maybe rather than sending them to a lower league but higher teams? A slightly complex way of saying that, but
yeah, I mean, I think if like anything, I think if you buy a player, you want to get the best out of them, so you want to send them off and so they can get better and come back. And if that's closer to home in Europe with a higher team and they get the training out of it and the playing time, then yeah, because I think a lot of times when you loan out a player, they sit on the bench. I think who was it? I can't remember the name. They got loaned out, but they specifically put in their contract that they had to play like 14 games while
one of the manager in the championship mentioned it.
Yeah, while they were on loan. And I think maybe if they, I don't know what the guarantee is with most players, but I think, if you're not going to get that in the championship or a lower league at home, but you're going to get that playing time abroad, then why not?
Okay, yeah, that seems like a good place to move on potentially from that question. We've got some really good points there. And everyone at home, let us know what you think really on that topic. I think it's a real area for development for football and looking at where to send players and where to educate players. That's really good. Okay, so let's move on to our second question of the day, uncharted territory for this podcast, the second question. And now we look at a slightly more controversial, let's say, than the first one. We're on deadline day, so transfers are a big point of contention for today. One place that managers have spoken about is the transfer window, and they'll often talk about it and often say that maybe we should have it, maybe we shouldn't. So would it be a good idea if we abolished the transfer window and just had a free market for players? What would be your opinion, Essay? Would you say that we should have a transfer window, or should we look for something slightly different?
I'm not a massive fan of a January transfer window, and especially when the deadline is when teams are playing will be playing on deadline day. It just doesn't make sense.
Okay, so you'd be in favour of removing just the January transfer window and just having one summer transfer window?
Yes.
Okay, that's quite an interesting point then.
But the thing is, though, I think the January transfer window should be limited to emergency signings only. But I'm not sure whether that would work.
Yeah, you talk about emergency signings. What sort of context would you say? Because there's already the ability for clubs outside of transfer windows to bring in an emergency goalkeeper if they say don't have one. Would you propose maybe being a fan of a club that played in the Championship semi recently? Used to have something, the emergency loan window. So you had the ability to go to a club and offer a loan for a certain amount of time. Would that be something that you'd be in favour of for that January transfer window rather than all these big? So looking at the Coutinho deal to Barcelona, the Aubameyang deal practically just an hour and a half ago.
And also the thing is, the problem is that players such as Coutinho and Aubameyang, they're now cup-tied in European competition.
Okay, so would you say actually there's less meaning to a January transfer than potentially a summer transfer?
Yes.
Okay, I'm gonna bring you in on this, El.
Okay.
With the transfer window, obviously you wrote that fantastic piece last week about the transfer window.
Just basic one, but
oh no, but it's really good basis, and I think that actually makes you really well qualified for this question.
Okay.
From your perspective with the transfer window, is it something that makes sense with regards to maybe looking from a wider perspective and looking at how other countries do it? I know it's practically accepted behaviour now for the football leagues in Europe, that is to have a January transfer window or have a transfer window in general.
I say yes, because I do think if you look at the origins of it, it was just to provide stability for teams and for players. Like if you didn't know if, let's say you sign, a massive signing. I don't know why no one is coming to my head because there's so many going on. Let's say Giroud. Giroud goes to Chelsea. He doesn't like it there. He can, ask to be transferred the next week. Be like, nah, I tried it, didn't like it. I want to go to Spain now. You know what I mean? I just think, that's why it was introduced in the first place, was to kind of prevent that stuff from going on. And I also think I read the Secret Footballer books ages ago, and he was the author was sort of saying if the manager has it out for you, they make it really, really difficult to get deals through. And I think if there wasn't a transfer window, I think the manager really could affect where you go a lot more than they do now.
Okay, so you'd be talking more of like a return to before the Bosman ruling in the 90s, where club players would have very little power over contract and over where they go, and
okay,
so it'd be reducing player power again. Okay,
but that's not necessarily a bad thing when you look at the inflated market. But I think there would still need to be some kind of regulation. If it wasn't a transfer window, it would be the transfer window with a different name, basically, Okay,
so maybe looking at restrictions from a different point of view, rather than restricting when a transfer can be done, maybe restricting the amount of transfers or what sort of transfers can be done. Like SA pointed out actually about maybe having a loan-only January transfer window.
Yeah, I mean, if all roads lead to that, then I'm for regulation, just for the fact that, again, like it's such a basic principle, but an important one, is that you need stability in your team.
Absolutely. Okay, so some really good points made there. SA, to bring you back in, we're talking there about protecting players and protecting the power they have. Would you say that actually the players have quite a lot of power as it is at the moment, and actually maybe removing the transfer windows as it is and having a free market could maybe lower transfer fee inflation by bringing down any sort of artificial blocks on a transfer?
I think if you leave a transfer window and replace it with the system that does going to look for all year round, it's not going to be great because teams can unsettle teams. Teams like this season, it's not a good look for football. I think it reminds me of if you go back to the summer of 2013, I think it was following Arsenal's home loss to Aston Villa. They then tried to Then tried to coax John Agboaye from Newcastle shortly before their Monday night game against Manchester City.
Okay.
So that's a key example issue.
Okay, so if you're talking there about with the transfers being done whilst matches are being played, sort of thing. So like tonight, there's the deadline at midnight, but there are games on tonight as well. To date this to the deadline day, obviously. Would you say that obviously the Premier League's moved away from that by agreeing to end the summer transfer window before the first game of the season? Would you say it's something they're trying to move away from, having transfers at the same time as games?
Yeah,
that's both.
Yeah, that's something that should definitely be looked at.
Okay, so Eleanor, to come back to you quickly.
Mm-hmm.
They were talking there about actually trying to keep a separation between when games are played and when transfers are made.
Mm-hmm.
That right? Didn't mean to do that. Would you say that that's the right thing to do to separate the games and the transfers, or would you say that actually transfers are such a big part of the game now and player contracts are being signed all the time? Would you think maybe not having that restriction would be good for the league, or would you say that it creates sort of a wildfire for transfers?
I mean, I kind of like the transfer window because you can kind of see where you are as a team. So you sign players in the summertime. You have that kind of half a season with them, and then at Christmas time you can evaluate where you are and say, okay, well, we need to get reinforcements in, and this is who we're looking for. And I think if there's no games, then you have nothing to evaluate against. You could say, oh, we like him, he'll do, but yet you find out later on that what you really need is a new defender or a new fullback. So I think when you can look at where you are and then make a decision, I think you make smarter decisions, and the transfer window kind of forces you to do that most of the time.
Okay, so you'd say that actually having the ability to assess your position,
yeah, exactly,
and then rectify it makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay, so so actually, would you say that really not having a transfer window may make sense in some regard for clubs and allowing them freedom to sort of manipulate their squad? Bring it to obviously if a manager is fired and then another manager is brought in, we've seen it multiple times this season for specific clubs. Actually, managers come in, they don't have the opportunity to bring potentially what the players they want to bring to the club and move players on that aren't going to get game time.
Yeah.
It could be potentially also a good thing for development as well then for players.
Yeah, potentially, yeah. But I think sometimes I don't know. I like structure in general, so I do think you don't want to be rigid. You do want to be the flexibility, but that's where the emergency signings come in. Like if you are without a certain player or whatever, you can go outside that, and there's plenty of free agents as well. So there, you're not completely limited to the transfer window. There are things like that in place. Okay,
so just going back on that one as well, would you say that maybe unrestricting the transfer window could hurt the opportunities for young players? Because we've seen maybe at Everton where they've had to bring young players in because they haven't had first team players available, whether it be for injury or selling key players. Could it hurt them if Everton could have gone out and bought established Premier League players or foreign players at a lower price? Would you say that's something that could hurt young players? Bring them to SA if SA's here as well.
Yeah, 100%. I think you've seen a lot of people a lot of youngsters come out and have to step up and do really well and get playing time they wouldn't have otherwise, and therefore they're on the radar. So yeah, I think 100%. Yeah.
Okay. I think that's been a really interesting discussion again. Actually, like the first discussion, that's gone off into another area. Actually, it's really interesting looking at transfers and their effect on young players. And so let's move on now to our final question. It was slightly under 15 minutes, that question, but let's try and move on quickly. Our final question, something that was put forward recently with the when Catalonia voted for its independence, and several clubs like to bring it up all the time, is the inception of a European Super League. So essentially just an extension of the Champions League where the top 20 teams in Europe get together and instead of playing the domestic leagues, we'll play in one big European Super League. Is that something that would make sense for those big clubs and also the other clubs that would be potentially left behind by it? Or is it something that we should look into doing and really globalizing football? Essay, if you've got, I don't know what your opinion is on that.
A European Super League will damage European football. European football needs a notion of promotion and relegation, and to not see that in the European Super League will just be a sad sight.
Okay. So would you say that one of the requisites potentially for having one of those is to have actually promotion relegation where the clubs that were, as I said, left behind almost would have the opportunity to maybe get into that league?
Unless you make a Europa League also a 20 team tournament, then nah.
Okay, so there is a situation where you'd be more happy with having a European Super League. So if there was promotion and relegation, if clubs had the opportunity to move from the bottom to the top like we have nationally, would it be something that you'd be interested
in? Yes.
Okay, so the door is open, however slight, however small, there would be a chance. Just going to throw over actually now to Elle. We're talking there about having a European Super League and what style that would take. Would you, in any format, would it be something that you'd be interested in, or is it something that would really kill your interest in the sport?
To be fair, I like the Champions League, and I like it. I like the FA Cup because you do see these unusual matches come together and you play. And I think sometimes with the Champions League that happens. Like when Leicester got into the Champions League, that was quite cool. You see, I think Azerbaijan's team did really well in the group stages.
Oh, Baku, FC Baku.
And I think that's quite exciting. It's quite cool to see these other clubs who are the best and maybe a smaller market get the chance to play in the Champions League and they did really well, like for a small club. And
so the underdog story is something that you'd say maybe be lost in a European Super League.
Absolutely. I think it was who was it, Florentino Perez, that said he wanted a guarantee in which the best always play the best, and sometimes that can be really boring. Like I remember when I first started getting into football, and I'm a West Ham fan, but like the first few games I watched were like Barcelona, Real Madrid, just the big games that you do watch that attract kind of more of a casual fan. And I had no idea that football wasn't always played that way, that you know what I mean? So I think if you only see the best playing the best, you don't get to see like those underdog stories or the team improve or grow, and you need that to have the connection with the club.
Okay, well, that's fair enough. Now, just to come back to USA. We're talking there about the Champions League and about actually having these great teams going head-to-head and fighting it out for the top honours. Would you say that having a European Super League would maybe ruin the lustre that the Champions League has? And maybe the prestige of it may suffer if you were to have those games regularly?
Thing is, if you had a European Super League, you wouldn't really have a fairy tale story as you had with Leicester City last season.
Okay.
Season also, people like for the traditional fan, they like to see teams who would cause an upset, but with a European Super League, you just wouldn't see that.
Okay, so it'd be almost cannibalizing what we have in in individual leagues now. So you wouldn't see a Leicester winning the Premier League, or I know Monaco weren't quite as much of a fairy tale, but then winning the French league, you'd maybe lose some of those stories.
Also, I mean, take I think it was hold on, a Cypriot team. I think it was called Agboaye Nicosia, who reached the quarterfinals in 2012. You wouldn't have to see teams such as them in a European Super League. So
okay, so really what we're getting at towards here is something that you and Elle have both said, is actually having those underdog stories, having clubs that aren't quite as established and as powerful, having the chance to beat these teams. You'd say that maybe having a European Super League would lose that. And would you say that's something that could hurt the global fan base of football, or do you reckon that actually we're seeing now with these friendlies that are being played before the season, we've got the International Champions Cup or whatever it's called now, where big teams will go and fight out in games out in the US or China or Australia or around the world. Would you say that actually the trend is going towards something a little bit more formal and something that could replace independent leagues? Eleanor, sorry.
No. Wait, sorry. What were you about to say?
So would you say that actually, obviously we're saying whether it's a good idea or not, would you say that actually we're trending towards something like that?
I think, yeah, globally, because, yeah, and the reason is because these clubs have more money. I mean, it's like you've got the budget to go all the way to China, go all the way to America and play these big games. But I do think that I think it's kind of a separate thing. I think people enjoy watching those, and it promotes a brand. But I think people can separate that those are kind of promoting a brand versus like a game, like the game of football where you're cheering for Burnley. Like that's a good example, and they're kind of coming up, and they've done really well this season. And I'm actually hoping that they get that Champions League spot. I think they can, or Europe, and I think you'd miss out on that. And I think people keep it separate. I don't know if I'm making sense, which is
no, absolutely. No, you mate. Yeah, that's a really, really interesting point. Is that something that seems to have come up actually a couple of times? Is the lack of surprise, maybe?
Yeah.
If you had a European Super League, it's actually a point you hit on there. Actually, when you're talking about the brand, you're talking about the brand of football.
Yeah.
You're talking. Would you say that the brand of football would be hurt then by a European Super League rather than helped?
Well, yeah, because you're only having big teams there that, you know, with big budgets and big players, and people expect a big clash. But sometimes, like I've said, you know, these games can be really boring to watch because if the teams are on equal footing and they both have spent hundreds of millions, sometimes it can be a really boring game to watch. They just cancel each other out. You know, I've seen it. Like I've seen a big clash, been really excited, and I've just sat there and just, you know, slept through the whole thing. But sometimes I'll see, like, you know, a smaller club play a bigger club, and that's just as exciting because the smaller club's really going for it. They're giving everything they've got. They're leaving it all out on the pitch, and you can just see how hard they're trying. And even if they lose, you still feel like, well, I got a game out of it. I got an experience out of it.
Absolutely, that's a very an interesting point to make, especially on the week after FA Cup weekend, where you see teams like Newport County holding Tottenham.
Yeah, I watched that at the pub, and everybody was just glued to it, and like, you know what I mean? You just felt for them. You wanted them to do well, and they got a draw out of it, and they didn't win or anything. It was just really exciting to see this big club like Tottenham go to this, you know, go to Newport, you know, in the small pitch. They had to wet the pitch down, you know, and play an old-fashioned game of football.
Okay, so maybe the question actually we're trying to get at here is that the question of a European Super League goes to the heart of football and the tradition side of it. So SA, you spoke there about having these big games and maybe they'd lose their special effects sort of thing. Would you say that actually also, would you say that tradition is something that needs to be protected in modern football?
Yes, it does. I mean, you can call me old here, but I just prefer tradition.
Absolutely. I think there's definitely a place for tradition in modern football.
And I think most football fans agree. I think most of us are very protective of the history of our individual clubs. And I think that's what makes it special. You know, you're part of a club, you respect the heritage of the club. You want to see the club do well. And maybe it's because I support, you know, West Ham. I guess maybe I'd feel differently if I was Man United and I had the money. I'm like, yeah, let's buy whoever, you know. So
I hear that as a fan, a fellow smaller than West Ham, but fellow small club.
Yeah.
Okay, so just to hit on one more point before we finish. Would you say that having a European Super League would lead to more inflation of transfer fees if these big teams were constantly fighting each other? Would you see maybe the 200 million transfer become commonplace and actually that could hurt the sustainability of football as much as the tradition or the luster of the game. We come back to SA or throw that out to the floor.
I mean, would it become like English manager situation where you see the same old faces, like, oh, Ronaldo's not doing well, let's give in Neymar, you know? I mean, that's just an example. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Like, these clubs would just be trading players back and forth amongst themselves and maybe not giving youngsters a chance, which I don't think that would happen all the way. But, you know, it may be a case of same old faces, or could be in that situation if you're playing in a Super League because you want the best against the best.
Okay. That's a really interesting point you bring there, that actually it may become a closed system almost.
Or homogenized, I guess.
Yeah, nice long word for yeah, no. Well, that's a really good point. I hadn't actually considered that one. Let's see. Well, what's your opinion on that essay?
I'm just sending you something in the messages.
Oh. So you've spoken there about the format of a European Super League.
Yes.
What sort of format would you recommend? If someone had come to you and said that we're looking to set this up, what sort of format would you want for it? What sort of way would you want it to be run?
I think your idea of that will be the top 20 champions. I wouldn't have it like that, but rather have the top 20 teams ranked by UEFA, because I think fans would like to see derby games, see Real Madrid, Barcelona, Manchester United, Chelsea, and so on and so forth.
Okay.
Like what's seen in Super Rugby, so.
Okay, so more of the derby style matches.
Yeah.
Okay, so really creating those rivalries between clubs and really playing on that with obviously the commercial aspect and the broadcasting aspect. That's a really interesting idea. And what would be your opinion on that? If they were to say that we're looking at we're having this European Super League, but we're still going to focus very much on these rivalry games, on these ones that mean a lot to the fans, would it be something that you'd be interested in?
Oh yeah, who doesn't love a good derby? I mean, I never miss when we played Tottenham. Yeah, I guess that does appeal, you know. But I think again that goes down to what makes football great, which is the heart and the people, you know. And I think if it's done the right way, having derbies are great. I still watch El Clasico. Like I'm not a big fan of either Spanish side, but yeah, derbies do appeal to you, you know.
Okay, it's just to turn that one on its head a little bit before we finish. Would you say actually having these derbies more often, do you think that would cannibalise the effect of them? Actually, if as a Brighton fan, I think if we were playing Crystal Palace 5 or 6 times a season or on a more regular basis, I think that may eventually lead to it being, it's them again. Here we go back through the same old routine.
That happened with us. I mean, we played Tottenham at least 3 times so far.
Well, you met each other in the cup, yeah.
Yeah. And I think one of the times it wasn't that exciting. So yeah, I'm 100% for that.
Okay, so it'd still be exciting though if you were to have these games on a more regular basis than we see now. It would still appeal to fans on a long-term basis.
It depends, really. I mean, I guess that's what makes a derby special. They happen twice a year, I guess, in the league at least. You know, and maybe that's enough. I think it's just bigging up, maybe making more of a spectacle out of those games that happen organically might be the better approach.
Okay. Well, that makes sense. Okay. That's another really interesting discussion. Now, let's just say, I think that we'll call it there. And the full-time whistle's gone. But be sure to make sure you let us know your thoughts in the comments section below. Be sure to check out the various pieces of content we have on our site, as well as our football predictor at halftimecuppa.com. And finally, a big shout out to today's panelists, SA and Eleanor. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you.
And if you just want to give yourselves a quick shout out, obviously, as well.
If you have nothing better to do with your time, you can follow me on Twitter at LEC212, and you can read my column weekly, The Bluffers Guide to Football. We just talk about basics. It's just all back to basics. So whether you want to know about the offside rule or the transfer window, just give those a little read and share them with your friends.
Absolutely. I would definitely recommend The Bluffers Guide to Football. If you're just getting in, or if even you see yourself as a bit more of a connoisseur of football, they're definitely worth a read. So, Essay, do you want to give yourself a quick shout out?
Yeah, my handle is at A96LAYE. But you can tweet me on just tweet me anything to do with football, and I'm open to discuss. Also, you can just follow my football ramblings.
Perfect. Yeah, definitely give Essay a follow. And so thank you very much. I've been your host, Charlie Pumfrey, and you've been listening to the 10th episode and the 2018 January Transfer Deadline Day special of the Halftime Podcast.